The topic I've chosen today is data to discovery in information security. There are two parts to this talk. The first part is to tell you the explosion of data, and I'm going to tell you there is a concept called the revenge of silicon.
Topic that I have been contemplating, as not only as a researcher, but also as a person heading an institute.
Switch it on.
Yes, switch on.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Good morning. So we'll wait for just a few more minutes, sir. So 11:05 we will start it.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, sir.
The university distinguished lectures are being organized in such a way that the faculty members, the research scholars and students of SRM University AP will get benefited. Also, these lectures are being attended by large gathering of participants from several premier institutions, universities in the country and abroad.
So this first slide actually are the videos from our experiments, which I'll exemplify by 3 stories.
The topic I've chosen today is data to discovery in information security. There are two parts to this talk. The first part is to tell you the explosion of data, and I'm going to tell you there is a concept called the revenge of silicon.
Topic that I have been contemplating, as not only as a researcher, but also as a person heading an institute.
The title is basically the 13th to 21st century, the saga of science, and I represent Indian Institute of Chemical Technology.
Today, my title of my talk is Philosophy of Ultimate Success in Scientific Life.
Title I was saying is something about the art of science in the time of COVID-19 and beyond, and something like the brave new world, the new millennium. And
so, these days the buzzword is excellence. Where does it start? What do we mean by excellence? Let me start with those principles.
SRM University AP, nestled amidst acres of greenery, is one of the youngest multi-stream research-intensive institutions in the country, forging ahead with a distinct vision and unique modus operandi. We foster a distinguished learning culture, offering infinite avenues for our students to explore, experience, and evolve themselves into new age professionals. Collaborating with the best names across the globe, the campus is furnished with state-of-the-art infrastructure catering to the needs of students. From multi-cuisine cafeterias and lively dining areas to Wi-Fi enabled residential spaces with the most modern amenities, we render a warm and pleasant environment where students can learn, live, relax and feel at home. The green and healthy ambience nurtures a learning environment that goes beyond academics, encouraging students to refine their inherent talents and follow their passion. The student clubs and societies give them umpteen platforms to engage in extracurricular activities and make their academic endeavor the most happening phase of their lives. Welcome to SRM AP, the right choice for the next generation.
Sir, let us start, sir. It's 11:05.
Yes, please. Good morning, everyone.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. So, good morning to everyone. On behalf of SRM University AP, I welcome you all to the 15th SRM University Distinguished Lecture Series. As you all may kindly aware that this SRM AP Distinguished Lecture Series is a unique one in this country, and we had several great scientists who deliver lectures on exciting topics. In this line, today we are going to have Dr. C. Rangarajan, Distinguished Economics, 19th Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. To begin with, I request our Vice Chancellor of SRM University AP, Professor Manoj K. Arora, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Manathan. Dear colleagues and students, welcome to the University Distinguished Lecture Series. As you all know, in this lecture series, we invite distinguished leaders who have done exemplary work in their professions. The purpose of these lectures is to promote interaction between eminent personalities in the respective subjects and faculty and students. The lectures are intended to motivate the young minds towards critical and scientific thinking. In this series, today, we have Dr. Rangarajan, and I believe that every one of us knows him. Dr. Rangarajan has been a distinguished economist, a policymaker, and an administrator. He has held several important positions such as Governor of RBI, Chairman of Economic Advisory Council to Prime Minister of India, Chairman, National Statistical Commission. He has a deep understanding of the Indian economy. Welcome, sir, to SRM AP. Friends, as you all know, we are living in Industry 4.0 era and gradually transitioning into Industry 5.0. The technologies like artificial intelligence, big data analytics, Internet of Things, cloud computing, 5G, blockchain have indeed intruded into everyone's life in one way or the other. More people are using smartphones, tablets, smartwatches, and bracelets, and other mobile internet devices to connect to a global environment anytime, anywhere. Certainly, the era of digital economy is there. You all know that digital economy is a combination of digital computing and economics. It describes how economic activities, namely production, distribution, and trade, are being transformed by internet and blockchain technologies. Today, these technologies have innovated not only how companies do business, but also personal finance. Therefore, we as a university also need to upgrade ourselves and prepare our students who will become the great and relevant economists of the future tomorrow. Fortunately, ours is a multidisciplinary campus where we have science, engineering, technology, management, liberal arts, social sciences, innovation, and entrepreneurship under one umbrella. We therefore have the right ammunition to venture into digital economy and finance by forming cross-disciplinary groups. In this line of thoughts, I am happy to share that we shall be launching a Center for Interdisciplinary Studies on campus during this semester. Sir, our School of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences has a strong contingent of faculty members, including distinguished and invited professors. The school has 6 departments: economics, English, psychology, history, commerce, and liberal arts. The university has plans to expand activities around economics and finance with a focus on Indian economy, money, banking, finance and insurance, environment and energy, quantitative economics, agriculture, and natural resources. I'm sure that your interaction with the students today and faculty will lead to greater understanding of Indian economy and finance and will certainly generate a spark in them to excel in this area. We also look forward to your continuous support in future for the growth of our programs. Thank you for being with us today. I would also like to thank our Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Narayan Rao, Dean of School, Professor Kamia Bandi, the faculty and the students of School of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences in organizing 15th version of our University Distinguished Lecture Series. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Professor Kamaya Bandi, Professor and Dean, School of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, to give a brief introduction about Dr. C. Rangarajan.
Honorable Professor Rangarajan and other dignitaries, welcome to SRM University, sir. Today I am highly privileged to welcome as well as introduce Dr. Rangarajan, a distinguished and a leading economist of India who played a key role both as an academic as well as a policymaker. In fact, Professor Rangarajan doesn't need any introduction to this well-informed audience, but nevertheless, to highlight some of the facets of Dr. Rangarajan, I would briefly introduce his profile. Professor Rangarajan, as our Vice Chancellor has already mentioned, held important positions in the country, which include Governor of the Reserve Bank of India and also the Governor of Andhra Pradesh. Dr. Rangarajan was, till May 2014, the Chairman, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister in the rank of Cabinet Minister, a position he held since January 2005, except during a brief period, that is 2008 and 9, when he was a member of Parliament, that is Rajya Sabha. During 2003 and 2004, Dr. Rangarajan was also the chairman of the 12th Finance Commission, a constitutional commission set up by the government every 5 years to determine the sharing of tax revenues between the center and the state governments. Dr. Rangarajan, as I mentioned earlier, was Governor of the Reserve Bank of India during 1992 to 97, at a time when India embarked on wide-ranging economic reforms, a very crucial period which fundamentally altered the structure of the Indian economy. He was actively involved in the design and implementation of the reforms. The path-breaking reforms that he implemented during this period include deregulation of interest rates, an important step, strengthening of the banking system by a gradual tightening of prudential norms, creation and nurturing of financial markets and giving them depth and vibrancy, shifting to market-oriented exchange rates, making the rupee convertible on the current account, and the cessation of automatic monetization of the budget deficit. A great departure from the past. India became a member of Bank for International Settlements, BIS, during his time as governor. After obtaining his honors degree from Madras University, he obtained his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. In the United States, he taught at the Wharton School of Finance and Commerce, University of Pennsylvania, and the Graduate School of Business Administration, New York University. In India, he taught at Loyola College, Madras, University of Rajasthan, the Indian Statistical Institute, New Delhi, and for well over 1.5 decades at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He was, for a brief time, a fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, Washington. Dr. Rangarajan was the president of the Indian Economics Association in 1988, the president of the Indian Econometric Society in 1994. He was the conference president of the Indian Economics Association in the centenary year 2017. Here I may like to add that Dr. Rangarajan has the unique distinction of being the president of two important societies, that is Indian Economics Association and Indian Econometric Society. Dr. Rangarajan also authored several books. I'm citing a few mainly on the Indian economy. Among others, the books that he wrote: one, Tracking the Indian Economy, a collection of articles published in 2017. Counting the Poor, Where Do We Stand? This is published in 2017. Federalism and Fiscal Transfers in India, 2011. India, Monetary Policy, Financial Stability, and Other Essays, 2009. Then Selected Essays on Indian Economy, 2 volumes. Then Indian Economy, Essays on Money and Finance, 1998, a very popular book. Dr. Rangarajan was a recipient of several prestigious awards. Notable among them have been the Honorary Fellow at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, Alumni Award for Outstanding Leadership by the Wharton India Economic Forum, and the Finance Man of the Decade by the Bombay Management Association. In recognition of his distinguished service to the country, the Government of India honored Dr. Rangarajan with Padma Vibhushan in 2002, the second highest civilian award. He was the recipient of Professor P.C. Mahalanobis National Award in Official Statistics in Lifetime Achievement category in 2020. Incidentally, Professor Rangarajan was also the first chairman of National Statistical Commission. Dr. Rangarajan was awarded the first Dr. C.R. Rao Centenary Gold Medal for lifetime achievement by the Indian Econometric Society in 2021. He has been the recipient of honorary doctorate from several universities. Let me add a few lines. Dr. Rangarajan has the unique distinction of shaping, motivating 5 generations of economists, a rare distinction indeed. During the lifetime, it is a very rare achievement. Second, Dr. Rangarajan has brought down the gap between theory and practice. A person well grounded in theory, he has brought theory to the practice in his capacity as the Governor of Reserve Bank of India, in his capacity as chairman of several important committees. In this respect, Dr. Rangarajan deserves all our salute. And at SRM University, we constantly look forward to the support of Dr. Rangarajan to encourage the newly emerging liberal arts and social sciences group, and also the proposed School of Economics and Finance. Sir, with these few words, I will stop. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. So now I invite our eminent scientist, Dr. C. Rangarajan, sir, to deliver the distinguished lecture.
Here. Dear friends, I am indeed happy to be with you, of course, virtually, to deliver the lecture this morning. I'm quite sure the SRM University, Andhra Pradesh, which is an addition to the family of SRM institutions, will also be one of the leading institutions in the field of education and research. I propose to speak to you this morning on India at 75 and beyond. I would like to outline the economic development since independence and also attempt to look at what the future can be. India's economic journey really started with independence. Many people do not realize that India's economic performance in the first 50 years of the 20th century, that is between 1900 and 1950, under the British rule, was dismal. Those who have estimated the national income of the country of that period show that India's economic growth during the 5 decades was less than 1% per annum. It was actually 0.89%. India's population at that time was growing at 0.84%. With the result, the per capita income did not rise at all. It is not surprising that the major objective of economic policy immediately after independence was to accelerate growth. The dominant view in economic literature in the 1950s and 1960s was that the state had an important role to play and that it must undertake activities to correct what economists call market failure. That is, the inability of the markets to perform its functions. This was particularly perceived in the area of investment, that is, allocation of resources over time. And that is because of the myopic character of the participants. That is, investors and savers at the time were not quite clear about what the future of India will be. And therefore, there was a reluctance to invest. And it is at that point it was felt that the state must intervene and invest what is required in order to put the economy on a strong growth path. The strategy of development that was adopted immediately after independence had 4 elements. First, to raise savings and investment rate. Second, the dominance of state intervention. Third, import substitution, by which we mean produce at home what we are importing. And third, emphasis on heavy industry. Students of economics would know that the main driver of economic growth is investment. The famous Harrod-Domar model postulated that the growth rate of an economy is equal to, G is equal to, S or I divided by the V, which is the incremental capital output ratio. That is, in order for the economy to grow, you have to raise the level of investment. But growth is also dependent on another factor, and that is the incremental capital output ratio, which means the amount of capital required to produce 1 unit of output. Therefore, the emphasis on increasing the level of investment came out of these contributions. And it is accepted even today. Therefore, if you really want to push the economy ahead, we have to raise the level of investment. Obviously, the level of investment can go up only when the level of savings also goes up. Arthur Lewis, who was a Nobel laureate, said the central issue of development was how to convert a country which is saving 5% of its GDP into one that invests or that saves 20% of its GDP. Therefore, the need for raising the saving and the investment rate was well understood even at that time, and therefore the emphasis on raising investment was one of the elements in the strategy of development. The second, as I mentioned earlier, was the dominance of state intervention. It was felt at that time that the private sector was not in a position to be able to push the economy forward, and therefore that gap has to be filled in by the state. The third is import substitution, which again many economists emphasized at that time because of the fact that our ability to export was limited, and therefore we may not be able to import what we need through exports, and therefore we must actually produce domestically what we are importing. But of course, this has some implications which were not fully understood by all at that time. And the fourth is the emphasis on heavy industry in the industrialization program. The intellectual support for this came from the Mahalanobis model, which indicated that over a period of time, it is only the production and manufacture of machines which will ultimately support and provide a sound basis for the economy to grow. Strictly speaking, the Mahalanobis model was valid only in a closed economy. In any case, these were the four elements which constituted the growth strategy at that particular time. There were some critics at that time, but most economists and most policymakers agreed on a strategy which included these elements. But by the end of 1970s, it became very clear that the model that we had chosen needed modification. But we did not, at that time, make the change, even though, as I shall explain a little later, the 1980s saw some important reforms, which were, of course, followed up in a big way in the 1990s. The crisis of 1991, when India entered a phase in which, or entered a year in which, the problems faced by Indian economy were so acute that there was a compulsion to change our strategy of development. The three important breaks with the past that occurred in the early 1990s, which is what we call the reform period, contained three elements. One was dismantling the complex web of controls and licenses and permits, which covered very nearly every aspect of economic activity. What to produce, where to produce, how much to produce. The second was the redefinition of the role of the state. That we need to modify our own perception of what the role of the state is. And the third is to abandon the import substitution policy, or what is very often referred to as the inward-looking policy, and to embrace global trade and to become a participant in the global trade and willing to compete with the rest of the nations. The question is, what has been the performance of the Indian economy over the last 75 years since independence? Till the end of 1970s, the average annual growth rate of the Indian economy was 3.6%. During this period, the population grew by 2.2%. You may recall that I earlier mentioned in the first 5 decades of the 20th century, the population grew only at less than 1%. That is because in that period, in the first half of the 20th century, the birth rate was high and the death rate was high. Initially, because of the various efforts undertaken, the death rate came down, but the birth rate did not come down, and therefore the overall growth rate in population increased. So to go back, the average annual growth rate until the end of 1970s was 3.6%. The population growth was 2.2%, and therefore per capita income was 1.4%. Is that a good performance? Certainly, it was a good performance compared to what we saw under the British rule in the first 5 decades. But it was not still a happy performance because it fell short of our own expectations. If you looked at the plan documents, first plan, second plan, third plan, fourth plan or fifth plan, the expected rate of growth during the 5-year period was 5% per annum. Therefore, we fell short of our own expectations. It is also true that when you look at some of the other countries, like, say, Malaysia, South Korea, Taiwan, all these countries showed a rate of growth which was higher than what we had in that period. But let us not underestimate also some of the big changes that had happened during this period. Social indicators like life expectancy at birth, it almost doubled. At the time of independence, it was only 32 years. Average life expectancy of an Indian. It went to 61 years by the end of 1970s. The literacy rate jumped. The infant mortality rate came down. So there are many areas in which significant improvement had occurred during that particular period. After the Green Revolution, there was a substantial increase in agricultural production. In the industrial base widened to include the production not only of commodities like steel, but also machinery and heavy machinery. Therefore, looked at from one angle, the performance was satisfactory, particularly looking at it against the background, as I said, of what happened in the first 50 years of the 20th century. But at the same time, there was certainly a decline, or there was certainly a shortfall in the growth rate against our expectations. In the 1980s, several changes were introduced, particularly in the field of foreign trade. But the 1980s was also marked by a high fiscal deficit and a high current account deficit. This resulted very near collapse of the Indian economy. And in 1991, our growth rate fell to almost 1%. But that's not the only thing. That the crisis of 1991 implied that we need to make a change. And as I indicated earlier, substantial changes were introduced in the economy because of the fundamental changes that the reform agenda implied. I mentioned earlier about the three types of breaks with the past. One can ask the question, did this change? Did the introduction of reforms result in acceleration of growth? Did it result in the reduction of poverty in the country? Quite clearly, the data do show substantial improvement as far as growth is concerned. Between 1992-93 and 2000 and 2001, the average annual growth rate was 6.2%. If you look at a subsequent period, up to 2012-13, it was 7.4%. And following it up from 2013 to 2019, it was 6.7%. Therefore, quite clearly, the growth rate increased. And the best performance of the Indian economy was between 2005-6 and 2010-11, when the average was 8.8%. Between 2005-6 and 2007-8, during the 3-year period, the average annual growth rate of the Indian economy was in excess of 9%. Therefore, we really thought at that particular time that we are moving at a rate of growth which will ensure that significant changes in the standard of living in terms of poverty will occur. I will come back to that issue later. But unfortunately, after 2011-12, the growth rate fell. There were many reasons for it. One, all economists advocate or talk about what is the cyclical character of the economy. In all economies, the economy starts growing, reaches a peak. Once it has reached the peak, it begins to fall. Because once the economy has reached its full potential, then it is not in a position to go beyond it, and then it begins to fall. So something like that happened. But there are other factors also. I will not go into it this morning, but there are other factors like the enormous expansion in credit, which led to a severe fall in credit later on. And this was also a period marked by a lot of political conflicts and political uncertainties after 2012-13, which resulted in the decline in the growth rate. The decline in the growth rate from 2011-12, more particularly 2012-13, is important to note. And that has some implications for the reform agenda. In 2012-13, according to the 2004-5 National Income Series, the growth rate fell to 4.5%. According to the 2011-12 series, the growth rate in that year was 5.5%. You may wish to ask the question, what happened after 2012-13? What happened after 2013-14? There are some difficulties in looking at the performance of the economy on a continuous basis, because there was a shift in the base in computing national income. The 2011-12 became the new base. This new series also raised a lot of controversies because of some of the methodological changes introduced during that time. Therefore, there are difficulties in comparing the growth of the economy prior to 2011-12 and later. Therefore, I will not go into the controversy here, but they do show that the performance of the economy did come down, and the new series, however, showed for 2015-16 and 2016-17 a fairly high growth rate of almost 8%. This has raised many questions again. 2016-17 was the year in which demonetization was introduced. And many people were witness to the severe consequences of demonetization and the kind of suffering that many sections of the community, society went through. In any case, I will have to say that even with the new series, by 2019-20, the growth rate has fallen to 3.7%. This was followed by 2 years of COVID-19. COVID-19 is the first economic crisis which was triggered by a non-economic factor, which is a pandemic. In order to protect the people from the spread of COVID, lockdowns were introduced. And as a consequence of it, because of the lack of mobility of people, goods, input and outputs, the economy went down. And in 2020-21, the economy fell by 6.6%. In 2021-22, the economy picked up. The growth rate was 8.7%. Therefore, by the end of 2021-22, that is, let us say, by March 2022, we were what we were at the end of 2019-20. 1 year of fall compensated by the rise in the next year. Therefore, 2 years of loss, we were what we were 2 years earlier. 22-23, we all expected to be a normal year, but this went wrong because of the Russian-Ukraine war, and the economy is expected to grow during the current year at about 7%. I myself would say that even achieving a 7% rate of growth would be a creditable record. Perhaps it will be even lower than 7%. The Russian-Ukraine war and its consequences on the economy have several implications. The dependence on the oil imports, sometimes the dependence on the import from one country or from a group of countries has created a situation in which one has to be very careful about the trade pattern. There are other complications that have come. There's a change in the attitude towards about what the global environment will be. If the approach to trade, international trade, changes from a liberal to a restrictive attitude, it will also have implications for economic policy, economic strategy. Let me come to that after a few minutes. The performance of the economy is not always measured only by growth. The performance of the economy is also measured by how the benefits of that growth is distributed among the people, and whether the vulnerable sections of the society benefit as a result of the growth performance. People compute inequality in income. My own approach is that in the early period of growth, what is more important to measure is really the behavior of the poverty ratio in the country. First thing that we really need to address is to reduce the poverty ratio in the economy. Then, of course, after some time, we can address directly the inequality in income. I mentioned earlier about the good performance of the economy between 2005-6 and 2007-8, or a few years later too. It is now estimated that this period also saw a substantial reduction in the poverty ratio. In 1993-94, the poverty ratio was 45.3%. Let me here make also a point that there are controversies about measuring the poverty ratio. How do you define poverty? What is the cutoff line, and so on? So I am using the Tendulkar methodology, even though a committee under my chairmanship was subsequently appointed, and we have somewhat slightly different numbers. But basically, 1993-94, the poverty ratio was 45.3%. It came down to 37.2% in 2004-05. And in 2011-12, according to the Tendulkar methodology, the poverty ratio fell to 21.9%. Now, this essentially means that the per annum reduction in the poverty ratio was 2.18, by which the poverty ratio came down in the later period. In the former period, it was 0.7% per annum. The point that I wish to make is that the higher the rate of growth of the economy, the higher the resources that are available to the state. And therefore, it is possible for the state to provide various social safety nets, like extended food security. Please remember, it was during the period of 2005-06 to the next 5 years, the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme was introduced. The extended food security was adopted. So in a sense, the rise in the rate of growth of the economy, combined with a policy of providing social safety nets, can bring down the poverty ratio. In fact, some people who really talk about poverty ratio say that, look, the poverty ratio, looking at the consumption expenditure may not be the right thing, but there are other ways of measuring poverty also. There is the view on what we call multidimensional poverty index. The multidimensional poverty index looks at a number of indicators, multiple indicators, and look at their behavior during a particular period. What I said of the period up to 2011-12, that is a high growth phase. The Oxford study on multidimensional index of the period also said, and I want to read it, India has made momentous progress in reducing multidimensional poverty. The incidence of multidimensional poverty was almost halved, reduced by half, between 2005-06 and 2015-16, climbing down to 27.5%. The global multidimensional poverty index was cut by half due to deeper progress among the poorest, Thus, within 10 years, the number of poor people in India fell by more than 271 million, a truly massive gain. This is indeed high price. But my own fear is, since the growth rate fell after 2011-12, the possibility of the poverty ratio having fallen further is out of question. Perhaps the poverty ratio since then might have increased too. Therefore, we need to compute the new poverty ratio as early as possible. The Consumption Expenditure Survey, which had been suspended, must be resumed as quickly as possible, and we must compute the poverty ratio as quickly as possible. In my view, as I mentioned earlier, two things are needed in order to reduce poverty ratio: a higher rate of growth of the economy, combined with an attitude to provide social safety nets adequately in the economy. Now, let me take another 10 minutes to talk about the future. The reform agenda has shown that the rate of growth can go up. Now, what are the lessons that you have learned from the reform experience? One, it does lead to an increase in growth. Second, we need to identify sectors where we need reforms in order to improve the efficiency. Some of the sectors that require additional reforms to improve efficiency are power sector, the financial system, governance, and even agricultural marketing. State and center should be joint partners in this. Reforms need more discussion and consensus building. In the wake of a serious economic crisis, we were able to push the reforms quickly. Thereafter, it slowed. But then, if we want to introduce reforms now, we essentially require more discussion, more consensus building. Timing and sequencing of reforms is important. I have always argued that labor market reforms are best introduced when the economy is on the upswing. Therefore, it is important that the labor market participants do not feel that they are subjected to some unnecessary pressure and the economy is actually on the upswing. Finally, on the reform thing, my point is one that I had mentioned earlier. Reforms are not ends in themselves. Reforms lead to growth. Growth must lead to a better distribution, better equity. Reforms, growth, and equity must form the triad of economic policy. Let me conclude with what are the challenges and opportunities before us. Post-COVID, post-Russian-Ukraine war, a clear roadmap has to be drawn. As I mentioned earlier, the major driver of economic growth is investment. What has happened since 2011-12 is a decline in the investment rate of the economy. The investment rate, which stood at about 34 to 35%, gross fixed capital formation rate to be precise, came down to 28.8% as of recently. If we really want to maintain a high level of growth, we need to raise the investment rate from the present level of 28% to 33%. And we must also maintain the incremental capital output ratio which is in fact a measure of efficiency with which we use capital, must be maintained at around 4. Then we will be able to grow comfortably between 7 and 8%. Raising investments once again require creating an investment climate which is influenced both by economic and non-economic factors. We almost always talk about economic factors, but non-economic factors are also relevant. Keynes talked of animal spirits. The animal spirits are influenced not only by economic circumstances, economic initiatives, but also by non-economic factors like social cohesion. Therefore, we cannot ignore that. Public investment, because of COVID and other factors, has recently risen. But it is equally important that as we go further, the private investment, both corporate and non-corporate, must increase. And for that, apart from the non-economic factors I mentioned, stable fiscal and financial system is a must. As we look ahead, there are a few challenges. First of all, new technologies are emerging. We must be able to absorb new technologies. Artificial intelligence is only one aspect of it. There are other dimensions of the change in the new technology also. Therefore, we must equip the people to absorb the new technologies, and we must equip ourselves to introduce the new technologies. But the new technologies are not an unmixed blessing. While it does lead to an increase in productivity, it may have adverse implications for employment. This is an issue which both the developed and developing countries are facing. In fact, one area in which advanced technologies or new technologies can make a big difference is in the area of energy. Energy raises many issues. One, availability of adequate sources of fuel. And second, the environmental implications of the fuel sources. Bulk of, for example, energy in our country is being used by BUE, is being generated through fossil fuels. But they are mainly responsible for polluting the system. Therefore, the new technologies like solar technology and non-conventional sources of energy have to be accelerated. It is indeed very surprising now to note that the solar technology through which energy is generated, the cost of it has come down drastically in the recent years. Therefore, absorbing new technologies have implications for employment. Absorbing new technologies also require creating an environment in which people will get trained for the new technologies. Then the other thing is development strategy must be multidimensional. It cannot be as it happened in the, as I mentioned earlier about some of the smaller countries like South Korea and Taiwan and others who prospered because of export-led growth. Of course, China also, a large country, moved ahead because of the export-led growth. But that, whether it will be available to the same extent as it was before, let's say, 5-10 years ago, is a big question mark. So the global environment, but therefore, the strategy of development cannot be unidimensional. The strategy of development has to be multidimensional. The environment considerations I mentioned earlier. And also, most importantly, as we grow, we must build the appropriate social safety nets. Only a little bit of arithmetic. People talk about becoming a $5 trillion economy in our country. we are almost about $2.7 to $3 trillion now. At one time, it was said that we must move to a $3 trillion economy in 5 years. That would imply actually a real growth rate of about 8%. That is a hard task to achieve in a continuous way. We have not done it, but it is possible. One other goal that is being put out is we are today 75 years after independence. In another 25 years, we will be 100 years after independence. Can India become a developing country at the end of the next 25 years? That goes into the question of what constitutes a developing country. The developing country definition, as of now, is that a country whose per capita income is 13,000 American dollars, 13,205 to be exact, will be today described as a developing country. Our per capita income today is between $1,900 or $2,000. It's a long way to go. But it can be done. Calculations show on some assumptions regarding the exchange rate behavior and the behavior of inflation, that somewhere around 7% per annum growth rate spread over the next 25 years will take us there. But that is a big task before us. And that is not easy to achieve. We need to take care of the opportunities that are available. We need to understand our weaknesses. I think what management experts talk of SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, need to be understood very clearly as far as the economy is also concerned. As many people say, India is the 5th largest economy in the world. And recent projections by IMF and others say that maybe in another 5 or 6 years, India may be the 3rd largest economy in the world. That is true because India is a large country. And therefore, adding up the income of everybody is really, it will be large. But if you look at it in per capita income, it is very small. I mean, we are almost 142 out of 190 countries in the world. Therefore, we need to become a developed country. We need to be able to exploit the strengths and opportunities that are available. Fortunately, we are not as bad as many other developing countries. We have built over the 75 years a reasonably strong economy. If we can utilize the opportunity and make use of our strengths, our goal is not that difficult. It is difficult. It is not that impossible. But therefore, the whole possibility is growing at 7% for the next 25 years will make a big difference. Despite global environment, it is possible to achieve it. India is a vast country. Aspirations of youth are growing. We have no choice but to run fast. In fact, I should say to run faster. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your excellent talk on Indian economy and towards our growth of our India. So now I invite Dr. S. Anand Rao and Dr. Erra Kamal Sai, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, to take over the question and answer session.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Anand Rao, I have a question to Dr.
Yes, sir.
Nagarajan.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Please, sir.
Can I ask?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Salutations to the modern Kautilya of India, Dr. Rangarajan, for the excellent talk delivered, which is being heard attentively by many youngsters. Now, I have a question to Dr. Rangarajan.
Dr. Narajan, you are kindly aware that any country that has made advances in prosperity has invariably depended on science and technology and R&D. It is also a fact that science and technology is the established currency in the geopolitical world. In that scenario, the funding provided in this country for R&D, in my opinion, is abysmally small. Of course, scientists and technologists in this country have done remarkably well given the resources allocated. Now, my question is, what is your comment and recommendation? What should be the percentage of GDP for S&T and R&D? Dr. Narayan, please.
Well, as I mentioned in my talk, the main driver of economic growth is investment.
Yes.
And investment essentially means investing resources in machinery as capital and so on. And that actually comes as a result of the efforts of technologists immediately and at one step removed, the scientists. So from the science, technology develops, and from the technology, the industry grows. So we really need 2 or 3 things to do. One, of course, is create an appropriate environment in which science and technology will grow. Resources are one thing, but more important, and there are also other things besides resources in order to create the scientific output and technology. We need institutions. We need correct attitude in the institutions. I want to emphasize that because I think this is and also the attitude to the application of science to technology is equally important. Now, there are 2 or 3 things. I mean, the point really is that all of this cannot be done by the government alone. I mean, I think whenever we talk about what percentage of GDP, now there is what we can really do is to create that set of circumstances in which, besides the government, which is directly involved in science and technology, also create or enable the private sector of the system to develop science and technology. If not science, at least definitely technology. Therefore, the tax system, and other facilities that can be made available will have to be done in a way that the investment in the area of R&D, as you call it, is done not only by the government, but also by the private sector of the system. I'm not able to say quite clearly what that percentage is. I mean, this is not very easy to say that. But what we should really do is that every industry, irrespective, I mean, beyond a particular size, must devote a certain percentage of its own profits in this area and bend the tax system in such a way to promote that. I think that is what is clearly needed. And the other thing is that the kind of educational institutions that spring up in order to promote science and technology. Our own technology institutions, they have done good work, but not all of them are necessarily oriented towards breaking new path. I mean, I think this is all. I'm not criticizing the faculty or the scientists or something, but the architecture of the educational institutions should be such that it promotes innovations and application to industry. Therefore, that is why we called it CSIR, Central Scientific and Industrial Research. The word industry was added to science because the idea was that these labs, these institutions will not only develop some basic innovations or basic ideas in science, but also apply that to industry. So the point really is R&D can be carried on by industry, R&D can be carried on by government, R&D can be carried on by educational institutions. And we must create the appropriate environment in each one of these institutional agencies to perform the function.
Dr. Anandarao, is
Yes,
a
sir.
supplementary question allowed?
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, Rangarajan sir, can we take some more questions, sir? With the
No,
permission?
supplementary question to this.
Okay.
Is it allowed?
Yes, sir.
If Dr. Rangarajan allows, I wish to interrupt.
Yeah.
Dr. Rangarajan, you have kindly and nicely mentioned that R&D in any country cannot be by the states funds alone. Also, the ecosystem, any country or many of the countries have a broad spectrum of institutions, which this country also has. Coming to the point of percentage allocations, look at other countries. How much percentage from the government funding is coming in addition to the private funding? Also, if you look at this country, organizations like Indian Space Organization, ISRO, today is a world leader in space technology. We have to realize, given the resources allocated, some of these organizations are doing quite well. Now, my pointed question is, if you wish to recommend, what will be the percentage? You see, the government funding, private funding is usual for many of the countries, not unique to this country. But as scientists and technologists, we feel that sufficient resources are not being allocated for S&T, R&D, if this country has to become, as you mentioned, a developed country. Also, you mentioned now technological advances are needed in non-renewable energy sources. So, renewable energy sources like that, what is your recommendation of the percentage of GDP, if you wish to mention?
I'm giving the same answer.
Okay.
I'm not committing myself to a number because that number I will have to really find out. I mean, I think what is there, what the different segments have done or something. I agree with your major observation that if India is to become an advanced economy, strong, even industrially strong, means industrially strong in science and technology, we need to allocate the additional resources. I mean, that much I can say. But the precise percentage is not only dependent on what science and technology has to do, because I can say, all right, 20%, if I say, but then
that percent is too high. No country is spending 20%.
Okay. No, I'm just throwing a number, saying that some other sector of the economy will have to take the cut. I think this is, therefore, as economists, we have to really look at who gives away and who gets it. And therefore, that the thing will have to be looked at from that angle. But
okay.
For example, in the United States, some of the biggest changes in the area of technology all happened because of defense expenditures also. I mean, I think in the post-Second World War, or even during the Second World War, many of the inventions that we now talk about were introduced at that particular time, even though the basic aim was destructive in character. But those inventions were the ones which led later on to in the civil life of the country. Therefore, the point really is that every arm, so to say, of the system, wherever innovations and wherever technological improvements can be done, must do it. I think some effort being made now saying that we must produce even within defense, some of the things that we are importing from outside. because that is also arises from the need to be able to stand on our own feet when an emergency arises. And therefore, the technological improvement can come from there too. So I can only go along with you in saying that maybe what we are doing now is not adequate. We need to move further, but the precise percentage, maybe some other time when I have the time to look at everything, I will tell you.
Definitely, I look forward to have the number from you at some appropriate point of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, can we take some more questions from the audience?
Yeah, you take another 10-15 minutes. We can. Then after that, we can stop.
So this question is from Lakshmi Rajyam, sir. Basically, it's a debatable question which is happening right now. What is the impact of various freebies given by central and state governments on economy and development?
Freebies, is it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Freebies given by central and state governments.
Now, the word freebie is not well defined. The whole question is what constitutes freebies and what constitutes the right commodities to be distributed. Therefore, I had written an article which was entitled Good Freebies and Bad Freebies. Therefore, essentially, the state distributes several types of goods and services. Take, for example, public distribution system. The public distribution system, the subsidy involved in that is very high. Between 1 lakh crore and 2 lakh crore of the central budget goes to providing for food grain at a concessional level, because the subsidy is equal to the price that the government pays for procurement and the price at which it sells. It's quite large, and therefore there is a significant. Now, in a broad category of goods, this is also a good that is being distributed by the central government at a concessional, at an extremely concessional rate. So what we really have to do is to look at the total gamut of goods and services that can be distributed and classify them in some way. There are essential goods and services which can be distributed. Then there are what are called merit goods, which economists term. That merit goods are those goods which have got high level of externalities. That is, the provision of that good is not only beneficial to the person who receives the benefit, but also in a sense, the society at large. And thirdly, there are goods which can be distributed, which go only to the person to whom it is distributed. The criterion is essential, the criterion using the characteristics of essential goods and merit goods can be distributed as not freebies, but at essentially concessional rates. It's only when you go beyond that categorization, when you want to distribute TVs or refrigerators, then the question arises, what is the benefit of that to the society at large? I mean, there is a benefit which goes to somebody. So I believe that the best way to do is whether the commodity or the service that we are talking about falls into the essential category or to the merit good category. That can be done. But the point really is both the words essential and merit good are also very elastic. They are not that strictly defined, because the concept is defined strictly. But what commodities fall into that category becomes somewhat difficult to define, determine. So I mean, on this whole controversy about the freebies, basically the concern appears to be that if there are many number of commodities which are distributed as freebies, then what happens to the financial system? I think the best approach is really, in my opinion, not to define what can be distributed and what cannot be distributed. The political system will not agree to that. I think the political system will say, we have been elected by the people, we know best what the people should be distributed. But the point that I would like to stress is, yes, you have the freedom to define what you think is appropriate, but we must strictly go by the criterion of fiscal prudence. We have defined, for example, under the FRBM Act originally, that the center fiscal deficit cannot exceed 3% of the GDP. The states are allowed to have a fiscal deficit up to 3% of their state domestic product. We have been very loose in implementing this. We can always give reasons why it has happened. It's some catastrophe or the other happens every year and say, therefore we do it. Therefore, the way out, as far as I am concerned, to this issue of freebase is that we become more strict on the fiscal prudence side. Then, if you say that the fiscal deficit shall not exceed 3% or shall not exceed 3% of the state domestic product, then essentially, then that becomes a big control over it. Then the state government or the central government will have to think twice or thrice before distributing something as distributed at a low price or at a freely. Therefore, given the political system, controlling what can be distributed and what cannot be distributed is going to be very difficult. But we can really say that there must be a stricter control over fiscal prudence. After all, what is the problem with freebies? The problem with freebies, as as the term is used in public parlance, is that if that category goes on increasing, then the state is not in a position to be able to support that level of expenditure, because there are other expenditures which are compelling. The state has to run the government. The people who are employed have to be paid, and many other things. Therefore, it is not an unlimited revenue that is available for this. Therefore, the approach that we can take is focus attention only on essential and merit goods. But let us also be very strict on saying that fiscal prudence on the part of the state and central government should be followed strictly. Now, I think whenever the fiscal deficit exceeds the criterion that has been set in the respective acts, then the government, either at the center or at the states, must come forward and explain to the parliament or to the state assembly why they have exceeded that level of deficit.
Thank you, sir. Sir, we'll take one more question. Yes. This question is by Dr. Hari Venkatesh. As you rightly mentioned, investment is an engine of economic growth. However, the capital formation rate has reduced to 28% in 2022 from 36% in 2007. How can we increase this rate to pre-global financial crisis levels?
No, I think I did indicate what is needed. The point really is that we need to create the appropriate environment for the investment to happen. This is what we call the investment climate. The climate should be such, both because of general stability of the economy, because of certain other characteristics which are required by the investors, that they should be emphasized. Therefore, there are two ways of doing things. One is look at generally the investment climate. I mean, I think whether the tax system or or the incentives that are available in the system are adequate in order to be able to promote investment in general. That is the general atmosphere. Then we need to look at sectoral investments and see what the problems are in that particular sector and try to remove the roadblocks or the difficulties as to why the investment is not forthcoming in that sector. Therefore, by and large, we should focus on the investment climate, the kind of actions that can be taken, either in the general tax system or so. Then it will provide an overall environmental atmosphere in which the investment will increase. Second, as I said, look at sectors in which investment are made. Do we need to provide some special incentives for investment to flow in that area? Is pricing the problem, pricing of the product the problem because of which investment is not forthcoming? That if the pricing is artificially kept at a low level, then it becomes an issue. Then profitability of the industry is affected. And when the profitability of the industry is affected, investment doesn't flow into that sector. Therefore, sector-specific problems can be looked at. I think this is the way in which we can really do in order to raise the level of investment rate.
Thank you, sir. One more question from Gayatri Priya Jonnala. Respected sir, how do you think India can take advantage of changing global geopolitical powers, where the East is finally able to possibly challenge the developed West?
Can you repeat the second half?
Yes, sir. How do you think India can take advantage of changing global geopolitical powers, where the East is finally able to possibly challenge the developed West?
Good question.
Two things. One is strategies that are directly focused on what we do in order to strengthen our position politically and strategically. The second is the one that I, as an economist, will urge. It is only the day in which the nation is economically strong and powerful, only then the country will be able to can influence the system as a whole. Look at China. I mean, many people think that what China is doing is not correct, and certainly they have adopted a belligerent attitude. But they all keep quiet very often because China has emerged as the second largest power in the world. So the economic power, that is critically important. Therefore, when I talk about 7% rate of growth or 8% rate of growth, I really mean that it's only when you do that, then economically strong. It is a country which is economically strong that can be politically strong and strategically strong. And yes, I think the ability to pursue an independent policy, the actions that we take in order to bring several countries closer to oneself. These are all important strategies for making the country politically powerful. I mean, that is independent of economic strength. Economic strength stands by itself. That is, the people look up to you. Second is, naturally, non-alignment might have been the most appropriate policy at one time. Now, as we move along, maybe that we need to get other people together, other countries together, in order to make yourself felt in the system. Why? That is why we talk of so many groups. BRICS we talk of, then we talk of G20, we talk of some other grouping. So from a strategic and political point of view, some attention to grouping, some attention to become to be counted upon as a group is also important. But once again, I will emphasize the biggest strength, your ability to influence events in the world will come only when you become economically strong. Yeah, okay.
Sir, I think more and more questions are popping up, but due to time constraint, Manathan sir, can we?
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Anand Rao.
Thanks.
So now I request our Pro-VC sir, Professor D. Narayan Rao, SRM University AP, to present a virtual memento to our chief guest, Dr. C. Rangarajan. Sir, please accept this as a token of gratitude.
More than 1 billion people of this country, day in and day out, are enjoying the fruits of liberalization and economic reforms. Today, Indian economy is fairly stable at a time when economies of the developed nations, US and UK, are crashing. The fairly strong economy of India is due to the strong roots of Indian economy that have been laid down by people like Dr. Rangarajan. Thus, as a token of our respect and appreciation to Dr. Rangarajan, I wish to call him as modern Kautilya of India. I deem it a great honor and pleasure to present a virtual memento to Dr. Rangarajan. Yes, our colleagues will send the memento physically in due course. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Our
Thank
salutations to you.
Yeah.
Now let's give a standing ovation to Dr. Rangarajan. The participants, wherever you are, kindly stand and give standing ovation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Now I invite Dr. S. Anand Rao, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, to give the concluding remarks.
So good afternoon to all. Thank you, sir, for this wonderful lecture, where a lot of take-home points are there with us. So according to the dictates of time, everything that has begun must end too. On the high note of enthusiasm and engagement, with Dr. C. Rangarajan, I'm afraid we must bring the proceedings to a close. I must begin by thanking Dr. C. Rangarajan for this intense session. You have given us loads to reflect upon. You sparked an interesting discussion and a constructive debate. Special thanks to our Dean, Professor Bandi Kamaya, for conceptualizing and organizing this distinguished lecture. As faculty members, we look forward to more of such occasions so that we can draw upon these contemporary subjects in our research and help our students stay updated as well. I thank the president of this university, Dr. P. Satyanarayan, for the creative freedom to hold such discussion. Special thanks are due to Vice Chancellor, Professor Manoj K. Arora, Pro-Vice Chancellor, who is the brainchild of this distinguished lecture, Professor D. Narayan Rao, for providing encouragement and support to make such programs possible. I thank my colleagues for supporting me always, whether it is holding this talk or for everything else. I thank the students for sacrificing their Saturday morning, but you all know we'll be discussing this deeply when we meet in the next classes. Don't worry, we'll be quizzing you. My gratitude to ITKM team for being the silent partner and constant support behind these scenes. Finally, I end with a promise that we'll be back with another possibility, especially with Dr. C. Rangarajan, hopefully in person next time, so that such thought-provoking ideas and discussions keep happening. Thank you all and have a good weekend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anand Rao. The UDL 15 ends here, and we can see in the next UDL. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mannavan.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Okay.